Hello, and welcome back to Eric Likes Animals podcast. I'm your host, Eric Mahan, and I'm here to chat with you guys today about some environmental news stories and, of course, some animals. Now, I do have to warn you, however, this episode's creature feature will have some adult themed topics covered in it, mainly reproduction related, sort of, but to truly tell this animal's story, it's fairly important for me to go over this. So I will warn you again right before I start talking about this a little more after dark part of the podcast because nature is not always PG to tell you the story. Sometimes I have to go straight to the rated R version. But I do respect and understand some people don't want to dive into every aspect of nature. So I will warn right before that part of the programming. That way you can just skip ahead to a part that's a little less rated R, let's just say. But it's not too intense. However, I just want to make sure that you understand that this episode has a lot of those features in it. But enough about that. Let's get started first with some good old wholesome environmental news stories. First up, a rare piranha like fish with human teeth was caught by a young angler in Oklahoma. Now, I know this is not the first time we talked about a fish with human teeth on the podcast. However, this article is talking about an invasive fish known as a pacu, which originates from South America, and they have evolved human like teeth to them, which is designed to accommodate a varied diet, which even though this is a fish, it's not very shocking then that since our teeth were also kind of designed in a way that has a varied diet kind of designed to it, that a fish that also has a varied diet would also have very similar teeth, specifically for things that are omnivore or things that have an extremely varied diet where they might eat animals or plants or harder nuts to break through. But enough about that. The article goes on to talk about how a young boy in Oklahoma caught a very bizarre piranha like fish with eerily human like teeth. The young boy caught the exotic fish known as a pacu in his neighborhood pond on the weekend of July 15th, according to a Facebook post from the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife and Conservation. Pacu is a name given to several species of fish that are native to South America and are closely related to piranhas. But with a similar body shape to their razor-toothed cousins, pacu enter freshwater ecosystems in the US when people keep them as pets, but irresponsibly then release them into nearby ponds, rivers, where they grow up too big for their tanks. So, real quick, pacu also aren't going to go after blood or you if you accidentally go into the water. A lot of times they eat a lot of fruit. They just happen to be cousins of piranha. But just want to clear that up in case there's any Oklahoma listeners out there and starting to freak out. Now, the exact species of pacu that was caught is unknown, but the group is known to have various species that grow around to about 3.5 feet or 1 meter long and can weigh a whopping 88 pounds to 40 kilograms. So there are a couple species that of pacu that get quite big. Now, like I said, despite looking like piranhas, pacu are pretty much harmless to humans. Their flattened teeth or human like teeth are likely the result of their varied omnivorous diet, which includes normally small fish and hard shelled crustaceans as their most prey kind of items, where they also eat a lot of fruits and nuts from freshwater plants. Pacu poop is also extremely helpful in its native lands to fertilize freshwater plants and disperse their seed, which obviously makes them a keystone species in their native area. However, like most invasive species, pacu can have negative impacts on the ecosystems that they are introduced to. The practice of dumping unwanted pets into waterways can be incredibly harmful to native wildlife, which a Oklahoma Department of Wildlife wrote on Facebook. They are an exotic invasive species that can cause damage to our local ecosystem. As a result, any anglers that do catch pacu are urged to remove them from the rivers and ponds when possible, also stated by the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife. After all, pacu is an extremely fascinating and amazing species to see, but only when they're in their natural habitat or in any sort of proper accredited aquarium. So if you are a fisher in that area or anywhere else and you see a strange fish, before you release, maybe just do a little research first. Thanks. Next up, experts say cocaine sharks may be feasting on drug dumps off of Florida. Now, I know a movie just came out about a cocaine bear, which really did happen, unfortunately, to a bear that got some illegal drugs into its system. And unfortunately, the movie made light of it and made it more into a comedy and kind of passed all the actual facts of it all and made it more into a laughing matter. And the actual incident wasn't as funny or as lighthearted as the movie made it out to be, especially since cocaine and other drugs, whether it be illegal or not, getting into wildlife can cause many different issues from birth defects, long term damage, and yes, of course, death, whether it be from an overdose or just simply it being so strung out on drugs that it becomes easy prey to something else. And well, Cocaine Bear might have been the one to get the movie. Shark Week will be having a whole show about the potential evidence that the drug trade through the Florida coast has seen sharks and other marine life consuming cocaine from drug smugglers ditching their bales of cocaine into the waterways when they need to ditch it for whatever reason. The article goes on to quote from some of the people that made up the main team on the show that they say it's a catchy headline to shed light on a real problem. That everything we use, everything we manufacture, everything we put into our bodies end up into our wastewater, streams, and natural water bodies. And these aquatic lives we depend on to survive are then exposed to it, said Dr. Tracy, who is a Florida based environmental engineer and lead member of this research team. We studied with pharmaceuticals, cocaine, methamphetamines, and ketamine, all of these where fish are being affected by drugs. If these cocaine bales are a point of source of pollution, it's very plausible sharks can be affected by this chemical. Cocaine is so soluble that any of these packages open just a little, the structural integrity of it destroys, and the drug is then released into the water. In their research conducted during 6 days at sea in the Florida Keys, the ecological sensitive island chain of the state's southern tip, a number of marine biologists observed sharks exhibiting peculiar behaviors. A hammerhead, a species that would usually swim away from humans, came directly towards the divers, while also moving very erratically. They also observed a sandbar shark swimming in circles as it focused on an imaginary object. They also conducted experiments, including dropping dummy bales in the water, which many of the shark took bites out of, and loading bales of bait with highly concentrated fish powder to simulate cocaine. The effect, the researchers said, was akin to catnip on felines. Florida serves as a staging point for large quantities of drugs making their way into the U.S. from South America, and plastic wrapped bundles of cocaine are often lost at sea or tossed overboard by traffickers being pursued by law enforcement. Last month, the U.S. Coast Guard announced that it recovered about $186 million of illegal narcotics from the waterways of the Caribbean and southern Florida. But such seizures have little impact on the industry operating at record levels. Dr. Tracy then goes on to say in the article, while we were in the Keys filming, cocaine bales were washing ashore like twice in 1 week. So it really is a prevalent issue. In the coming month, Dr. Tracy plans to partner with other Florida marine scientists to take blood samples from some of the sharks to evaluate cocaine levels. She said she hoped those who watched the Cocaine Shark episode during Shark Week would appreciate the threat to marine life and Earth's fragile ocean ecosystem from pollutions in the water. Hopefully this show, although most likely being tuned in because a lot of people think it would be funny to see sharks high on cocaine, will end to realize that the impact that they make, no matter where they live, is really affecting our water ecosystems. And then finally, how two indigenous communities help bring back a sacred caiman from the brink of extinction. For years, two indigenous communities in southeast Colombia have worked to protect the black caiman, the largest predator in the Amazon River basin, which was hunted to near extinction because, well, it has some very prized skin. The two communities, along with some support from a conservation international partnership that combines scientific measures with, of course, traditional indigenous knowledge, are seeing the species rebound. The black caiman is sacred to these indigenous people of Colombia's lower rivers who believe it's descendant from a man and now rules over the waters and fish. Stretching up to 7 meters or 23 feet in length, it's one of the largest members of the alligator family and an apex predator whose dark skin absorbs heat by the day and provides camouflage during nocturnal hunts. But the reptile's hide also made it vulnerable decades ago as demand for alligator leather grew. Black caimans became an easy target for hunters due to their large size, because more size means more skin. Between the 1970s and early 1980s in areas of Colombia, there was a huge problem with caiman hunting. In 2008, the native communities began to notice the caiman's dwindling numbers, and then they decided to band together to reverse this trade. With funding from the Conservation International Group, a lookout cabin was built near the lakes of these riverways, where families who live on the reserve can stay and take turns monitoring the black caiman, carrying out surveillance patrols while also getting paid for their time. Last year, following the accumulation of about 14 years of work, the communities led the first ever survey of the species, counting 123 black caiman. Before conducting the survey, Conservation International and the community elders participated in a knowledge exchange where they learned both about the community's goals for the survey and the scientific approach to monitoring. The surveys were conducted at night with three co researchers packed into a small wooden canoe. Each researcher had a job: steer the boat, illuminate the shore, or record the data, such as caiman size. Caimans play an important role in the dedicated balance of the Amazon River basin. They eat everything from very small animals to deer, helping to keep the species population in check and the ecosystem healthy. Even their excrement plays a role in the region's ecology. It's a vital part of the food chain, particularly for zooplankton and phytoplankton, which in turn are an important food source for fish hatchlings. As a result, declining caiman numbers have been linked to declining fish populations, even though caiman do eat a lot of fish. That's what happens when you mess with the circle of life. Cayman, however, are just the beginning of the community's ambitions to protect native fauna. Currently, they are working to protect native species of turtle and fish, both of which are at risk due to habitat loss and overfishing. The communities are receiving training in mainly how to scientifically do wildlife monitoring, which means that the entire community is trained so that everyone has the necessary skills to conduct the monitoring. Literally, not just taking one, but two whole villages to save these native wildlife. And that is your environmental news. So, for today's species, I have chosen a creature that, as I said before, had some little bit of rated R parts to its natural history, but is a major form of its socialization amongst themselves. And well, let's just say it's after dark theme. So that portion will be going over some more explicit content. And I will make sure to warn you right before I start talking about it in case it's a little too much for you, but it's still a major part of this animal's natural history. So I will, of course, have to go over it because it's science. So we can't just bow away just because it makes us uncomfortable. It is important still to talk about because the featured creature species today is the bonobo. Now, if you never heard about a bonobo, it's perfectly okay, but you may have heard of their more famous cousins, the chimpanzee. And the bonobo, by the way, was the last great ape to be classified, so in terms of species classification, it is quite new, although it was kind of classified in the 1920s or 30s, so not that new. But like I said, it is a cousin to chimps. And in fact, they look fairly similar to chimpanzees to a point that they were actually called pygmy chimps at first. But later on, it was classified different species. So now, bonobos. Now, however, besides being smaller than chimps, they are also considered leaner and darker looking than chimps, and do have a number of other factors that in fact make them a completely different species, namely DNA. But both bonobos and chimps share about 98.7% of the same DNA as we do, making the bonobo one of our closest living relatives along with chimps. Bonobos do also live near chimpanzees, but bonobo's home range is found more in the rainforest south of the Congo River in the wilderness of the Dominican Republic of Congo, where on the eastern and central chimpanzees ranges are found around the edges of bonobo's habitat, and there are probably some borders that aren't really a thing to the animal world that state that they don't cross it, but most likely that there is a chance that chimps and bonobos do meet in the wild is pretty high. But for the most part, there are some territories on the map. So, in average, that's where you would find bonobos. The bonobo, while standing, is about 3.8 feet tall or 115 centimeters tall, and male bonobos are a little heavier at 86 pounds or 39 kilograms, and the females come in at 68.3 pounds or 31 kilograms. And they have a very wide lifespan range out in the wild, about 20 to 40 years. But hey, I guess like people, you never know what's going to happen. And in all honesty, bonobos being so recently classified and being in a hard area to study, not much is known about the wild counterparts. However, in captivity, they have been known to live for 50 years. And I know we have kind of already talked about looks a little bit, but why don't we dive in because I'm shallow and I want to talk about what they look like a little bit more. Now, the bonobo, of course, like I said before, looks very much like a chimp, not just in look, but also how they move. But the bonobo is more slender with longer limbs, a narrower chest, and a rounded head with a less protruding face. Also, bonobos are more comfortable with walking upright than chimpanzees are, so they are known to be walking on just two legs a little more often. Also, bonobos will keep their white rump patch for life, while the patch normally darkens with the age of chimpanzees. Bonobos look quite distinguished also because their hair is normally neatly patted down in the middle of their head, giving them a very wise look to them, if I do say so myself. And in rare occasions, bonobos for food may go after birds, monkeys, or tiger, a small antelope creature that's found in these forests. But for the most part, it seems to be very rare and only in more desperate situations, unlike chimps that do it more often and are perfectly capable of hunting monkeys and other animals fairly frequently. In the wild, bonobos eat mainly leaves, stems, fruits, worms, insects, and sometimes even small fish and shrimp, which they will fish with their hands, having much less of a dislike of water than it appears chimps do. And even though they are near water and can come down from their trees to get a drink, bonobos can get almost all of their hydration needs just from the juicy fruit that they eat, which is good because they don't always want to come down to the water very often because a very formidable hunter lives there. Crocodiles, who definitely wouldn't hesitate to take on a bonobo. Besides crocodiles, large snakes could also target potentially younger bonobos, and of course, a main predator of this region, leopards, may be a problem for the wild bonobos based on their region. Some of these, however, are just kind of scientifically accurate guesses from scientists. Like I said, bonobos are very secretive in the wild, and there are many things we are still trying to figure out about them. But most likely, due to these predators and where the bonobos live, it's almost guaranteed 100% one of them has eaten a bonobo at one time or another, even though scientists might have not seen it in person. Now, luckily, however, bonobos are very smart. They use leaves and twigs to build sturdy nests in forks of trees each evening, where then the entire group, which can range from a very large group or community of 30 to 100 individuals. And by all of them sleeping in the same area, they can actually help each other look out for predators, like I said, like leopards who like to hunt at night. And besides looking out for predators at night, these giant groups can act like sources of exchange information in this kind of sort of gossip group at night as well, kind of talking about the day's events. They can also keep track of each other and make sure that no one is missing. Adult bonobos will also sometimes share a nest, which is a unique behavior among great apes. Bonobos are very comfortable in trees, swinging hand to hand through the branches, climbing up tree trunks, and leaping from one tree to another in some great distances. Now, to start diving into some of the more unique things about bonobos, first up, groups of 30 to 100 individuals. But like our own society, within these groups that are large, they have seen a number of other smaller societies or smaller groups within that larger group, or if you will, cliques, just like us tending to hang out more with each other. Now, cliques are seen in chimpanzee culture as well, but a major difference between chimps and bonobos is that the leader of these big groups is a dominant male for chimpanzees, and in bonobo society, it's actually a female that leads the group, even though the males of the bonobos are known to be larger. Now, the females and the young are normally the ones that make up the core of bonobo society, with females sharing fairly often food and other resources with each other. Males, however, are still a little more stubborn, and even in bonobo society, are still not much for sharing with each other. But they still have to stay in line, for if they don't, the females will actually team up and deal with any discourse or troublesome males that may upset their calm society. Females may also sometimes fight for dominance, but in reality, this and even any sort of aggression at all in bonobo society is almost non existent whatsoever. A big difference from their cousins, the chimpanzee. Now, this is where we are about to get into more of the adult themed talk. So please skip ahead if this subject makes you uncomfortable, but if not, it's actually quite important to understand bonobos. Okay? Are you still with me? Great. All right, so we don't see much aggression in bonobo society, even against other groups. Instead, what we do see is a whole bunch of sex. And I'm not just talking about for breeding and the basic pass on the genetics sex. I'm talking about the whole book of Kama Sutra and probably a whole bunch more that they've made up. In times of tension, a individual seems upset, or two separate groups meet, or just really any time whatsoever, bonobos will solve all these things with sex. Doesn't really how many, who it is, the age, or even if it's a whole group of males or a whole group of females, it really doesn't matter to the bonobo. They do it for pleasure, they do it to calm someone, they use it to solve disagreements, and yeah, there's sometimes where they use it for breeding. In fact, the few zoos that do have bonobos in captivity normally have warning signs entering those areas, basically stating you are walking into an area where an animal is literally consistently creating a, let's just say, rated R area. So if you're not ready to give the whole birds and the bees talk, that might not be the area you want to go to. So, like, why? Why are they so obsessed with sex in all forms and all methods and just all that? Well, it does serve a purpose. It feels like this whole species of animals may just be constantly having sex altogether and seem to have no aggression. And the reason why is because, first off, bonobos is one of the few animals out there that seem to have empathy based on the region of brain empathy comes from, and of course, their actions. When an upset bonobo who have a wide range of vocal cues makes out their rapid ping pong call, that is a sign that they are upset. And individuals will rush to that upset bonobo and instantly try to calm them down. The individuals normally first start hugging, and if that doesn't work, then they move on to, well, sex of whatever form they decide. And that's all just simply to comfort the individual that is upset. They are concerned that he is upset. Second reason is that scientists believe the reason of this almost free-loving hippie lifestyle of the bonobo versus its cousin, the chimpanzee, is that where bonobos live, it is literally abundant with food. In truth, bonobos have little to no needs whatsoever. They're just so abundant with food. And because they are constantly getting all of the food that they need, they don't really feel like they need to protect their territories from other groups, which bonobos, as far as we know, don't really have borders like other animals. They don't really have a set territory. It seems like groups kind of come and go where they please. And groups will share food and have sex with each other and then go their separate ways as if nothing happened. Where, unlike chimps, in the wild where they came across a different group will literally try and kill and chase out the enemy group because they're taking their resources away from them. And with all that abundant food, high empathy, and is a lover of sex of all forms, Bonobo is sort of in this Eden, so all their needs are filled. So they now don't have aggression and kind of focus on other things that, well, give them pleasure. So, of course, sex is also for breeding purposes as well. There is a dominant female, like I said, and it's not like she is the only one that will have kids. She is more there to kind of tell the troop when to move, where to eat, and also kind of the settler of the peace. So she's trying to make sure that her group stays nice and calm. But since obviously everyone else is having sex constantly, there's going to be multiple females that have young. A lot of the times, the females will have a baby every 5 years. Now, females may choose to be with a male more often to breed with, but a lot of time they are breeding with all the males in the group. So eventually she will become pregnant, and gestation is about 8 months. And mostly they will have one and very rarely two babies born who normally weigh about 2.8 pounds or 1.3 kilograms. And when a mother gives birth, it's a huge event for the whole group. They get very excited, and many will even crowd around. And even more so, it has been reported that other females will help the mother give birth, acting like midwives to her. And just like humans, when the baby is born, they're pretty much helpless and completely rely on mom for moving around and, of course, nursing to get milk to feed. The babies also will normally be carried around on mom for about 2 years. Bonobos in general are also very playful society. Besides just sex, of course, they just like to play, with constantly making faces, making different sounds, and they do it all for fun, while also sometimes reassuring bonds between individuals and teaching the young how to communicate and other important skills they'll need as they grow up. Now, the mother bonobos may give birth every 5 years, but a lot of times, so she can keep up her social bonds with the group, she will start having sex again within a year. She, however, will not mother another kid till her current one reaches about 5 to 6 years of age. Now, what happens at that point is a little bit sort of different than a lot of other animals because the female is the one that will leave the group and not the male when they hit sexual maturity. Males will stay with their mothers their entire life and will gain prestige based on her position in the group. So it really depends on who your mother is in this society for your own position. And he will have strong bonds with her his entire life. Males without mothers or ones that eventually lose them have a much harder time in these groups because with no mom, no prestige. You normally are more on the outskirts at that point, which means a little less social interactions at the most because you will still get plenty of food. But for such a social animal like a bonobo, that can be extremely important, and missing out on that can be a little bit devastating. Like I said, as for the females, they must go off and find a new group. She will then breed with all the males in the new group that she found to start forming bonds in that group. But her membership does not get fully accepted until she gives birth to her first kid, which at the earliest may happen at 8 to 9 years of age when she reaches sexual maturity. So, with all this sex constantly, they must be doing great in population, right? Well, even though they are constantly having sex, remember a lot of it may not be in the way that actually, well, makes a baby. And females only give birth every 5 to 6 years because bonobos, like other apes, due to higher intelligence, take the same route as us. Instead of breeding every year and just having fast growing kids, they are slower growing, and we invest way more time into each individual kid. So, with that higher investment, each individual kid has a higher success rate than those that breed every year and have a ton of kids and then kick them out shortly after and say, good luck, one of you will probably make it. So it's kind of more of a quality strategy versus quantity strategy. So when we really add it up, where they're sexually mature at 8 to 9 years and live only in the wild 20 to 40 years, in the end, maybe at the most they'll have four kids, but that's really pushing it. But at the most, 1 to 4 is kind of the range. And all the bonobos getting along great and have a sort of Eden society and endless food, but predators still exist. So they might only have 1, 2, or 3, or 4 kids at the most, but who knows if leopards or snakes or something else happens to those kids. So yeah, it's still very difficult, even with them constantly breeding. So, with that in mind, looking at the conservation portion of the bonobo, according to the IUCN Red List, they are listed as endangered, population trend decreasing. In fact, bonobos may be considered one of the most endangered apes in the world. Humans continue to move into bonobo habitat, hunting these amazing animals for food, selling their babies in the pet trade, which is always just a horrible thing for many different types of animals. It's never good for them to be owned by private ownership, unlike certified breeding zoo facilities that are working with many different groups and government bodies around the world and has tons of resources, tons of training, tons of qualified staff who treat them with respect and the wild animals that they are. As well as, in addition, with the help of commercial logging operations, it creates new roads to harvest timber, giving people an easier access to hunt or capture many rainforest wildlife, including, of course, bonobos, as well as destroying this Eden with endless supplies of food the bonobos are accustomed to. But the main one I want to talk about is why these animals have stayed hidden from us for so long and why we still are just only learning about them now. And that is because war. War is not just a major devastator for humankind, but animal kind as well. And parts of the Congo and many of the animals that live there have been known to have tons of military and rebel wars happening in this region, devastating the wildlife and keeping it fairly unknown to outside humankind. In many parts of the world, the simple act of just friendly fire on wildlife or bombs dropping on the opposing side, trying to kill the other person's forces, wildlife always gets in the crosshairs on these wars. But in the Congo, it's actually a little bit worse because the animals like bonobos that in the middle of the night can be easily misidentified as an enemy coming up on you, because a lot of these soldiers are going to shoot first and ask questions later, because if you hesitate it could be the enemy, and by that taking that second to decide, is this really a person or is this a bonobo, because at night they're going to look fairly similar, and if you hesitate you could die, as well as some of them being locked away from supply lines depending on what's happening during the war. They're going to need to find food, which is normally devastating food away from the bonobos, or actually trying to eat bonobos themselves. So, for what we can do in this section, it's a bit more complicated because obviously I don't have just some big conservation idea that's like, oh, just simply start doing this or look at this cool invention. War is a little more difficult because protecting forests from logging and human deforestation, as well as the major breeding programs, that's easy, okay? The major breeding programs are going to help out, save the species in the long term, and make sure that they don't disappear, stopping the logging practices, looking for renewable resources. That's all good. But in terms of war, I'm just a zookeeper with a podcast. So I think that's a little above my head. But I will say this. When people ask why zoos and other conservation groups get involved with different human conflicts or misunderstanding, like bigotry or social awareness issues in our different countries, in the end, this is why. We have no hope of saving other species if we can't save ourselves. And understand and not hate our own species, how will we ever save another? After all, when you remove the constant sex part of a bonobo society, who is really less evolved? Us? Or a group of animals that take care of each other, share food with other bonobos that they have never met, in a society with little or no real aggression? The very kinky, however, but very peaceful bonobo. And that's the show. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed hearing about the bonobo. As always, make sure to check out my social media pages: Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. Along with, you can always reach out to me at ericlikesanimals@gmail.com. As well as making sure that if you haven't already, make sure to nominate on the Blue Loops Zoo and Aquarium influencer list. You can nominate them now, and links will be provided down in the episode footer as it lasts for whoever your favorite aquarium or zoo influencer may be. And that's it for me. Thank you guys once again for listening, and I will see you all next time.